So our next two chapters deal with finances. Our first one, chapter 1, is going to deal with financial investments. Our next chapter is going to deal with financial borrowing, so I'm just going to distinguish between those things shortly. But this specific lesson will be focused on simple interest. So let's get started. First off, what is interest? So you can think of interest as the cost of loaning money. So perhaps if you were loaning money to a friend, you wouldn't necessarily ask for anything in return. But if you were loaning money to a bank or a company, you would expect to get something back. And the something that you receive in return is interest. So you can think of interest as the cost that's associated with loaning money. Now, who pays that cost is the person or the individual or the company who borrows it. So chapter 1, our focus is going to be on investments. So we're loaning money to banks or to companies by letting them access our money for a period of time, and we expect to get something back for that investment. And what we receive back is interest. So we receive some additional money back for allowing them use of our money. The next chapter is chapter 2, which is borrowing. And in that case, we're going to be borrowing money from a bank typically, and that would be for purchasing perhaps a car or a house mortgage or things of that nature. So our focus in this unit is that we are putting money into a bank or into a company and expecting to get something back in return. Now, simple interest, which is the focus of this particular section, is interest that's calculated based on two things. It's based on the amount of money that we invest, so it's called the principal, and it's based on an agreed upon simple interest rate. So I did a little research, and simple interest doesn't come up that much in typical situations, certainly less than compound interest, but there are a few places that it's still used. For auto loans, sometimes if you're negotiating a car loan, that can be based on simple interest. Consumer loans, so this would be if you're receiving a loan from a store for purchasing an appliance. And finally, for discounts on bulk purchases, these are places where simple interest can still be used. Let's take a look at the simple interest formula next. So A equals P plus PRT. So A is the future value. That's the amount of money that we're going to have at the end of this investment. P is the principal. So this is the initial amount of money that we invest. R is the rate of interest. And that rate of interest always has to be stated as a decimal. So if we have a rate of interest given to us as a percentage, for example, 3%, before we can use it in this formula, we have to convert it into a decimal. So 3%, we would need to convert it to 0.03. And you can always convert a percentage into a decimal number by taking whatever the percentage is and dividing it by 100. And finally, T is the time. Time must be in years. So if you are not given a time in years, you have to convert it into years. So for example, say the investment was for 6 months. We wouldn't use 6 in place of T. We would need to convert it into years, and we could do that using a conversion formula. So for example, there are 12 months in 1 year. So 6 divided by 12 would be 0.5 years. Now you don't have to show this conversion every single time, but this is a method that you would have looked at in previous grades, and just that the time must always be expressed in years. Finally, if you look at this formula, it's broken down into two portions. This is our initial investment. That's the principal. And then this is the amount of money that we earn on that initial investment. That's the interest that we've earned. And sometimes we're just interested in what the interest is. So we have that I equals PRT formula if we're strictly looking to calculate how much interest is earned on an investment. And that's not the only way to count the interest earned, as you'll see when we start getting into these problems. Final formula we're going to look at is rate of return. So R equals I over P. R is the rate of return. P is again the principal, so that's our initial investment, and I is the amount of interest that's earned. Rate of return lets us compare different investments and figure out which one gives us a larger return. We will look at problems involving rate of return in this simple interest section, but this comes up a lot more later in the chapter. I just want to introduce it here to begin. The most important thing to note about simple interest when you're thinking about it conceptually is that the amount of interest that you earn or the amount of interest that you pay does not change from year to year. That is the key characteristic of simple interest. So, for example, if you earn $25 interest in year 1, what that means is that in year 2, you will earn $25 of interest. And in year 5, you will earn $25 of interest. And in year 3, you will earn $25 of interest. And in year 10, you will earn $25 of interest. So the amount of interest that you earn every year stays exactly the same. That's what gives us that linear formula that we use to calculate simple interest. Now that we've looked what simple interest is, let's look at some problems involving simple interest.